What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. 21 strange details about King Tut. More than almost any other ancient ruler. Facts about King Tut, the boy who led an empire and was buried in a tomb stuffed with gold and artifacts, have been hard to deduce. Who was this young man who was given the duty of continuing a line of godlike beings? How did he live? And how did he die? Since Tut's tomb was found in 1922, these questions have slowly been answered. Thanks to advanced technology in DNA analysis, we found some surprising facts about his heritage and his physical stature. It turns out that he wasn't the sensual, dashing boy portrayed in the iconography found in his tomb and afterwards in pop culture. Instead, he was the product of incest, born with deformities, with strings pulled by powerful generals, and a death not from murder, but from injuries caused by his ailments. Even so, mythology swirls around Tut, his death, the curse on his tomb, and the mythical figures in his life. Here are some of the stranger but completely true facts about this legendary boy king. The basic facts. Tutankhamun was born around 1341 BCE, the son of the powerful pharaoh Akhenaten. Two minor kings ruled Egypt after that pharaoh's death in 1334 BCE, until Tut took the throne in 1332. He ruled for around 8 or 9 years, with his chief accomplishment being restoring Egypt back to its polytheistic worship of the god Ammonius. Then he died in 1323 BCE at 19, and was buried in a quickly built but ornately decorated tomb that was forgotten about until its discovery in 1922 by British researcher Howard Carter. Tut had a variety of names. Before ascending to the throne of ancient Egypt, Tutankhamun was known as Tutankhaten, or living image of Aten. Aten was the living embodiment of the image of the disk of the sun, worshipped by his father Akhenaten, while Ammonius, also known as Ammonius Ra, was the chief deity of Egyptian mythology. The name change implies a pretty significant promotion for Tut. He was also known by a variety of other names, reflecting the divine roles foisted upon pharaohs. These include Kanak Tutmsut, Neferhepiseritui Werahaman Nebriger, Wetjiskos Hetip Netjeru Hekamatsahetip Netjeru Wetjiskot for Wetjiskot Gestawium, and Nebkeperur. But he was almost certainly never called Tut. His father and mother were related. Incest was very common among the Egyptian royalty, just like it was among the ruling families of the 19th century in Europe. They believed in keeping the purity of noble bloodlines, and it's generally believed that Tut's father and mother were siblings. Researchers at the Institute for Mummies and Icemen in Italy tested Tut's mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited only from the mother, and determined that his mom was the sister of the previous pharaoh Akhenaten, known to be Tutankhamun's father. Yes, his mother was his father's sister. The identity of his mother is unknown. Despite these findings, scientists aren't clear who Tut's mother actually is. There is a real possibility that she's the famous Nefertiti, also a wife of Akhenaten, and there's no way to know for sure. In the technical language of Egyptian studies, she's known simply as the younger lady. He had numerous disfigurements. Because of the incest that protected the bloodline of the Egyptian royal family, Tut had a number of prominent physical disfigurements. Far from being the virile boy shown in his golden death mask, Tut probably had a severe overbite, curved spine, a massively disfigured foot, extremely slim hips, a skewed face and epilepsy. He also may have had pronounced breasts. It's likely that Tut lived in extreme pain most of his short life. He couldn't walk without help. Because of Tut's severe clubfoot, he needed help walking. Over 100 walking sticks and canes were discovered in Tutankhamun's tomb, along with stools used for shooting a bow and arrow. It wasn't until the virtual autopsy that anyone knew why Tut would have been buried with all of these implements. He wasn't the only child ruler in history. While Tut became famous as a boy king in the pop culture frenzy that followed his discovery, he's far from the only one in history. A later Egyptian pharaoh, Ptolemy XIII, took the throne at around 11 or 12 years old and went to war with Julius Caesar's Rome over the cult of personality that surrounded his sister Cleopatra. Child monarchs also ruled China, England, and Jerusalem. His reign was more important than initially thought. Tut's reign as pharaoh was fairly short, around 8 or 9 years. It was historically uneventful, marked by a few minor military campaigns against Egyptian nemesis the Hittites, battles that Tut almost certainly had no role in. But Tut did play at least some role in reviving the worship of Ammonius, who had been cast aside by his father in favor of the monotheistic cult of Aten. Tut also moved the capital of Egypt from Amarna, also called Akhenaten city, back to Thebes, and restored many palaces and temples destroyed during previous conflicts. He had 2 powerful advisors. As Tut was only 9 when taking the throne from his father, he needed strong advisors to help him make decisions. He had 2 powerful deputies. One was Hormheb, commander-in-chief of the Egyptian army, and the other was Grand Vizier I, an aging cavalry soldier turned counsel who is thought to have been the real power behind the throne. I directly succeeded Tut after his death, but reigned only 4 years as pharaoh before he died and was, in turn, succeeded by Hormheb, who subsequently erased Akhenaten, Tut, and I from the historical record. He married at 9 years old. Just after ascending the throne, Tut was married to his half-sister Enkesenamen, one who lives through Ammonius. Little is known about her, though she was probably a few years older than Tut, and she was, like Tut, a child of the previous pharaoh Akhenaten, and quite possibly was married to him. Her mother was likely the famous Queen Nefertiti, who also might have been Tut's mother. Essentially, Tut's wife was certainly his half-sister, possibly his blood sister, and maybe even his stepmother. They had 2 children who both died at birth. The tomb of Tut revealed 2 small coffins containing the mummified remains of 2 babies, daughters who probably were twins. DNA analysis confirmed that they were the daughters of Tutankhamun and Enkesenamen. One of the children was found to have had a severe spinal defect, and neither appeared to have been born alive. Tut probably died of a broken leg. Theories abound as to why Tutankhamun died young. Everything from murder, usually thought to be a blow to the head, to genetic abnormalities to sickle cell disease are named as the culprit. But a 2010 study revealed that Tut probably died of a malarial infection acquired after he broke his leg. Genetically passed ailments probably had something to do with weakening the young king's immune system, leaving him vulnerable to malaria. But he might have died in a chariot accident. Tut's broken bones led a number of experts to conclude that he'd been crushed in some kind of chariot accident. But a virtual autopsy carried out in 2014 posits this as extremely unlikely, because many of the bone breaks occurred after he died, probably inflicted during the embalming process or in the early stages of his excavation. Tut also likely wouldn't have been able to get into a chariot due to his physical deformities. Tut was erased from history by his successors. I continued the reforms that Tut began, bringing the country back to its worship of Ammonius, and discarding the cult of Aten that Akhenaten favored. When he took the throne from Hormheb took things one step further and began purging references to Aten, Akhenaten, Tut, and from history and architecture. Monuments and temples that referenced either Aten or the kings in his line were destroyed, and the capital was moved again, from Thebes to Memphis. Tut himself was forgotten soon after, with his burial site built over. Tut's tomb was the most complete ever found. When Carter and his team found Tut's tomb in 1922, he had almost entirely been forgotten by history, due both to Hormheb's purge and Tut's reign being fairly insignificant. Other Egyptian tombs had been found by foreign expeditions, but none as well preserved as Tut's, and none with the sheer volume of artifacts it had. Even so, the tomb wasn't untouched. It was not sealed on the outside, and evidence showed it had been robbed at least twice in ancient times. It took 8 years to catalog the objects inside it and empty out the tomb. The curse of King Tut's tomb. The idea of those who disturb Egyptian tombs being cursed goes back to the 19th century, but went wild after Tutankhamun's tomb was found in 1922. While a number of members of tomb finder Howard Carter's team died within a few years of finding the tomb, that doesn't mean there was any kind of curse attached to it. In fact, simple math proves the idea of a curse wrong. Of the 58 people who were present when the tomb and sarcophagus were opened, 50 were still alive within a dozen years. Many of those who died were either older, or in professions that put them at risk. Tut became a Batman villain. The completeness of the tomb and the inherent pull of the story of a boy who ascends to become the most powerful ruler of his time had an enormous allure in popular culture of the time. As early as 1922, imaginations ran wild with Tut fever, and artifacts from his tomb toured the world. Maybe the strangest of the pop culture depictions of Tut was as a buffoonish, and not at all boyish, villain on the 60s Batman series. This version of Tut was an Egyptologist who got knocked on the head and thought he was the ancient Egyptian king, with a mandate to take over Gotham City. Wackiness ensued. Egypt will close Tut's tomb permanently. Howard Carter's initial excavation damaged the tomb, and decades of exhibitions and tourist hordes began to erode the art and artifacts inside it. Egypt opened a $700,000 replica of the tomb that could be visited in 2014 and plans to close the original permanently. He inspired a Billboard Hot 100 novelty song. Steve Martin released the novelty song King Tut as a single in the late 1970s, shortly after the Treasures of Tutankhamun exhibit had captured the nation's imagination. The song was later included on his album Wild and Crazy Guy. With a boost from a classic Saturday Night Live performance, the single sold over 1 million copies, eventually reaching number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Backing Martin in the song were members of the Nitty Gritty Band, credited as the Tutankhamons. There may have been a secret chamber in King Tut's tomb. Scientists recently discovered that King Tut's tomb may have had multiple chambers. They scanned the tomb using infrared thermographic technology, which measures temperatures on a given surface. The scans revealed that certain areas on the northern wall of the tomb differ in temperature from the rest of the space. King Tut's tomb may have doorways that lead to additional rooms, which would be a plausible explanation. Archaeologist Nicholas Reeves believes that one of these secret rooms may house Queen Nefertiti's tomb. "It may have been hiding from us in plain sight," said Reeves in an interview with National Geographic. Beginning in 2016, additional scans and research revealed that these rooms actually contain organic materials. However, it is unknown whether this indicates that a mummy is hidden behind the walls. "I cannot be sure what these organic materials could be. It could be a mummy, a sarcophagus, or anything. I cannot tell," said Mamdouh El-Damati, one of the researchers. His mask's beard snapped off 3,300 years later. In 2014, an Egyptian museum employee inadvertently knocked the famous pharaonic beard off King Tutankhamun's mask. A group including the head of the museum then attempted to quickly fix the relic, gluing the beard back with epoxy and scratched the mask's gold surface in the process. As of 2016, the 8 academics and employees involved are facing trial for gross negligence, for which they may face fines. Want more ancient Egypt? One of the oldest and most mythologized cultures in human history, ancient Egypt has attracted the curious and the adventurous for millennia. Archaeologists are still uncovering the secrets of the land, which has long been revered as a place of knowledge, mystery, and unparalleled beauty. The following ranker lists, as well as the books, media, and other sources, are highly recommended if you want to learn more about Egypt's history. A great place to start is Toby Wilkinson's The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt, an enthralling 1-volume work that draws upon the author's 40 years of archaeological expertise. The civilization is reviewed from its early beginnings to its ultimate fate as a vassal of the Roman Empire. For those more interested in the mythology of the culture, The Complete Gods and Goddesses of Ancient Egypt is as thorough as its title promises. When Women Ruled the World offers a unique perspective on ancient Egyptian culture by examining the reigns of 6 female rulers, including Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, and Cleopatra. If you're in the mood for a documentary, Egypt, the series is a great tour through the New Kingdom and its lavish monuments. With more than 300 photographs, many of them in color, the art of ancient Egypt pays homage to 3,000 years of glorious architecture, tombs, wall paintings, amulets, papyri, and objects traced to multiple Egyptian dynasties. This 5-panel wall art installation depicts the pyramids as they are today, providing a glimpse for those looking to add some epic flair to their home. For further reading on ancient Egypt, Ranker's editors have selected the following lists that dive into the truths and popular misconceptions about this fascinating culture. The new information about King Tut that made us go whoa. The creepiest myths and legends from ancient Egypt. Myths about ancient Egypt debunked. Few figures from the ancient world have captured the global imagination quite like King Tutankhamun, the so-called boy king of Egypt whose short, painful life and mysteriously well-preserved tomb have become a glittering Rosetta Stone for those trying to decipher the lost grandeur of the new kingdom. Born in approximately 1341 BCE into a lineage burdened with dynastic ambition and religious upheaval, Tutankhamun was never supposed to be a household name. But when British archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered his seemingly untouched tomb in 1922, the world fell headlong into a frenzy of Tutmania that has yet to fully subside, with exhibitions, comic book villains, novelty songs, and conspiracy theories keeping his legacy alive. However, beneath the cursed legends and the golden mask is a deeply bizarre and frequently tragic story that has been slowly reconstructed over the past century thanks to DNA scans, infrared imaging, and forensic reconstructions. Tut was born to Tankhaten, living image of Aten, reflecting the radical religious beliefs of his father, Pharaoh Akhenaten, who tossed out Egypt's pantheon of gods in favor of a single solar deity, Aten. However, Tut's reign marked a significant reversal of course because he changed Egypt's name to Tutankhamun, or living image of Ammonius, and returned Egypt to its traditional gods. Yet, that simple act of rebranding masks a sea of bizarre truths. For starters, Tut was the product of incest. According to previous theories, his mother was not Nefertiti, but rather an unidentified sister of Akhenaten, referred to in Egyptological texts as the younger lady. This has been confirmed by DNA analysis. As a result, King Tut suffered from a gruesome array of congenital disorders, including a clubfoot, scoliosis, a cleft palate, a protruding overbite, epilepsy, and possibly gynecomastia, a condition that gave him feminized features. Far from the dashing golden icon depicted in his funerary mask, Tut's real image, assembled from CT scans and digital facial reconstructions, is one of a frail, sickly teen who probably walked with a cane and lived in constant pain. His tomb contained over 100 walking sticks and canes, as well as stools for archery and hunting, not out of royal vanity but necessity. He wasn't just sick, he was isolated. Even though he was only 9 years old when he married his half-sister Enkesenemen, who was possibly a widow of their father Akhenaten, they had 2 stillborn daughters, both of whom were buried in miniature coffins that were found inside Tut's tomb. The genetic curse that had deformed Tut seemed to persist into the next generation, with one of the fetuses showing severe spinal abnormalities. Tut's rule, which lasted less than a decade, was thought to be inconsequential until recently. Initially dismissed as a pawn controlled by powerful advisors, more recent scholarship suggests that he had some agency in Egypt's return to polytheism and the restoration of temples and monuments desecrated by his father's radical reforms. But much of the real power lay in the hands of 2 men, Grand Vizier I, who likely orchestrated court politics behind the scenes and would eventually marry Enkesenemen to claim the throne after Tut's death, and General Hormheb, a military strongman who would succeed I and begin a sweeping purge of history that erased all references to Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and I from Egypt's monuments. Hormheb even moved the capital again, from Thebes to Memphis, and left Tut buried in what was essentially a minor noble's tomb, hastily adapted and hidden beneath layers of forgotten stone. His end was as strange as his life. For decades, historians speculated that Tut had been murdered, often pointing to damage to his skull as evidence of a fatal blow. But modern CT scans and DNA analysis have provided a more plausible, if equally grim explanation. Tut likely died from a severe leg fracture that became infected, coupled with a deadly bout of malaria, which his compromised immune system couldn't fight off. Ironically, even though he may not have been killed in a chariot accident, the condition of his broken bones led to the idea for years. However, it turned out that many of the breaks probably happened when he was mummified, possibly by quick embalmers who were not familiar with his unusually fragile body. Even weirder, some believe his body was partially burned during embalming, thanks to chemical reactions between the oils and resins used in his burial, a theory supported by the charred appearance of his remains. And yet, for someone who was all but erased from history, Tutankhamun returned with a vengeance. When Carter opened the tomb, the world was stunned by the wealth and preservation of the site. Over 5,000 artifacts, ranging from golden thrones and chariots to food jars and board games, all meticulously packed into a relatively tiny tomb. Even more astonishing, it had been robbed at least twice in antiquity, yet remained largely intact. The tomb was so rich with objects that it took Carter's team 8 years to catalogue and remove them. The so-called Curse of the Pharaoh was the most bizarre repercussion of the tomb's discovery. When Lord Carnarvon, Carter's financier, died suddenly in 1923, journalists latched onto the idea that Tut's tomb was protected by supernatural forces. Subsequent deaths of other team members, some natural, some odd, only fueled the legend. Still, a closer look shows that most of those present at the opening lived well into old age, including Carter himself, who died in 1939. Yet the myth persists, aided by its cinematic flair and endless retellings. Tutmania only grew in the 20th century. In 1976, a traveling exhibit of Tut's treasures sparked another global wave of fascination, prompting comedian Steve Martin to release a novelty song titled King Tut, which became a Billboard hit. In an even stranger twist, the Boy King became a campy villain on the 1960s Batman TV show, reimagined as a delusional Egyptologist bent on conquering Gotham City. Tut had become a symbol of popular culture, appearing in everything from Halloween costumes to sketches on Saturday Night Live. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, science was uncovering new weirdness. Infrared scans of his tomb's walls in 2015 suggested hidden chambers, possibly containing Queen Nefertiti's remains. While later scans were inconclusive, the idea remains tantalizing. More recent studies even discovered organic matter behind one wall, hinting at a yet unopened burial chamber. It's possible that Tut's final resting place wasn't so bad after all. But preservation efforts have also had their share of bizarre missteps. In 2014, a museum employee accidentally snapped the iconic blue and gold beard off Tut's burial mask. Worse, officials glued it back on with epoxy, scratching the gold and sparking outrage in the conservation world. Those responsible faced criminal charges for negligence. And perhaps most ironically of all, the tomb that revealed so many secrets may soon be permanently closed to tourists. Exposure to heat, humidity, and carbon dioxide has taken its toll, leading Egyptian officials to construct a $700,000 replica for visitors to enjoy while the real tomb is preserved. Still, the mystique lingers.